It's Thursday, March 17th, 2016. We are 25 weeks shy of week one of the 2016 NFL season, and you're listening to Reel in the Field Goals with your hosts, Kenneth Arthur and Danny Kelly of fieldgoals.com, where every week we get together, we talk about the Seahawks, and right now, part of the year, it's with the first wave of free agency completed and sort of moving into some of those cursory second and third wave type free agency guys, it's time to sort of focus on the draft and the guys that are in the draft that could affect the Seahawks, as well as just interesting players of note that we will be in the draft this year, and sort of the things that are going on with the combine and the pro days, which is going on right now. A lot of different pro days and pro day news and everything. So with us today is Erik Galko of Optimum Scouting. You can follow him on Twitter at Optimum Scouting. And Erik's going to come in and talk to us about players in the draft and what's going on and who might be going around to the Seahawks. Erik, I'm kind of curious, whether or not how often you actually start projecting players to certain teams and, how that affects, I'm looking at a mock draft here that you bravely put together in October of last year that, doesn't have a lot of the information, and players are going to change. Robert Nkemdiche, of course, he was your second overall projected player in that particular draft, and things happened to Nkemdiche that have dropped him, obviously, for everybody. You also, at the time, with the Seahawks picking 13th at the time with their record and everything, had them taking Germain Ifedi out of Texas A&M. Now the Seahawks have dropped down, and I've also seen that Germain Ifedi is still a guy that would be available to them at 26th. Is there anybody that you particularly like for Seattle's needs right now? And would it still be Germain Ifedi?
Yeah, first off, the joys of writing a handful of places at Sporting News and Bleacher Report, as well as some other places, means that Optimum Scouting sometimes gets the last update of the mock draft. We'll let you have a new mock draft at Optimum Scouting shortly, but certainly done plenty of mock drafts since that time. And the Seahawks are interesting because obviously, really since that time, since before the season started, the Seahawks probably were looking at offensive tackles to replace Russell Okung, and it looks like he's going to be gone. I haven't seen the news as far as if he signed any place yet, but all signs point to him clearly being gone, and they're kind of filling that gap at left tackle. So certainly finding a left tackle to fill his spot long term is one of their biggest needs, and their offensive line wasn't a strength last year. You guys know that better than I do. They want to kind of address that, and having Tom Cable as your offensive line coach is a huge plus because you can maybe take a guy that has, whether it's motivational, passion issues, developmental issues, the works. He's that talented offensive line coach. So I think certainly adding to the defensive line, keeping that a strength moving forward, as well as finding left tackle makes the most sense. And kind of looking at left tackles, if one of those top 4 or 5 guys falls, obviously they want to have a better athlete at left tackle. Jason Spriggs of Indiana is a guy I think might go top 20, but he'll fall a little bit. If he falls a little bit, the Seahawks might be interested, and he's a guy who certainly tested well at the NFL Combine. Or Betty, like you mentioned, a guy I've kind of lost a little bit of excitement on. I kind of had more optimism moving forward this year, but I think he's more of a second-round offensive tackle and still a guy who could develop into a strong tackle prospect, if not a guard. And certainly defensive tackle, I wouldn't take Ndiche at this point based on all I've heard and where teams kind of feeling him. He's definitely more of a second-round guy, but they'll have plenty of options in late round one. Guys like Vernon Butler and Chris Jones are both options as well. So if I had to guess, and again, you guys might know the needs better than I do, I think they can definitely get a good value at left tackle or at defensive tackle at their pick at 26.
Erik, I was going to ask you, there's kind of been a debate about whether or not picking a center in the first round is a good value. And you were just talking about value, left tackle, defensive tackle, things like that. There has been some talk of Ryan Kelly and Nick Martin for the Seahawks at center because they had center issues last year. Obviously, tackle's also a big need, but if there's nobody there, is center a good value in the first round? And do you like either of those two guys for the Seahawks?
Well, first off, I don't really like Nick Martin or Ryan Kelly as first-round picks.
Yeah.
I think both can be immediate starters, but the center position is one that's been a strength in the NFL, and we've seen guys have success at all parts of the draft process. So I'm not sure Nick Martin or Ryan Kelly are of that Alex Mack stature. When he came out of Cal, he was a surefire first-round grade guy, and teams wanted to get him because they knew he would be an all-pro type center. I'm not sure Nick Martin and Ryan Kelly ever will be one of those things. I like Nick Martin a lot. I think he's a safe, reliable 10-year starter at center, and Ryan Kelly probably the same way in a different system, but I'm not sure either one of those guys is really worth the top 40 pick. Maybe Martin, if you're really looking for kind of a Travis Frederick plug-and-play starter like the Cowboys found, but for the most part, there's certainly better value elsewhere. And also, this center class is very deep. Guys like, even in day 3 of the draft, Jack Allen of Michigan State, Evan Boehm of Missouri, Graham Glasgow, Michigan, even a guy like Anthony Fabiano, Harvard. We got to play tackle, guard, a little bit of center as well, working out of the center. Teams like him on day 3. All those guys could be starters and be found on day 3 purely because the center position isn't valued highly on draft day, and you can find starters throughout the draft. So I think picking a center in the first round is kind of rushing a team need when you can find those guys later in the draft process. We've seen so many have success.
And if you just like as far as that value, are there any mid-round left tackle prospects that you might see having good value?
Yeah, that's a dangerous proposition, right? You're looking to fill the hardest position in your offensive line in the mid-round. But teams have certainly done it before, and I think the best way to look at it is not just try to find a left tackle, because you can say, a guy like LaRaven Clark, for example, might be a mid-round value because he's not polished yet, but teams are going to take him in the top 40 picks because you can play left tackle. So you can't look at it finding a left tackle, but I think you can find a capable offensive lineman later in the draft that could probably the left tackle for the short term, maybe develop into a lot more. So there's not a whole lot of upside guys I think will get past the first few rounds. But I mentioned LaRaven Clark. I think he's intriguing as maybe even a second-round guy. I don't think he goes too far past the first round if he didn't even go first round. But I think he's got a ton of tools to work with, and he's one of the guys, like I mentioned, having Tom Cable gives them a unique advantage over these teams because he's one of the best offensive line coaches, if not the best, in the NFL. And having a developmental guy like LaRaven Clark, who has his fair share of terrible tape just from this past season, but has all the length and tools to work with as well as a positive demeanor, I think he'd be a great fit in Seattle. I've actually talked to people in the league about that kind of, does LaRaven Clark go first round? We've kind of agreed, well, if he goes first round, it's probably going to be Seattle because it's that kind of fit. But I think that's the kind of guys you're looking for. So as far as mid-round guys, you can plug and play with Kyle Murphy of Stanford. He's played left tackle in his career. I think Sean Coleman of Auburn, Avery Young, as well as both guys from the SEC could have a chance. John Theus of Georgia is a bigger offensive lineman, a guy I don't love, more of a day 3 pick, but he's played there. So I think if you want a plug and play guy who can play left tackle, you could probably find those guys late in the draft process. But I think the Seattle Seahawks have seen their value when Russell Wilson is protected and he can make moves on his own will as opposed to dodging pass rushers. That's when he really succeeds as a quarterback, and that's what I think they want to get back to for the offense.
Switching gears a little bit, I obviously people saw what Von Miller did in the Super Bowl and how you can kind of dominate a game with a pass rusher. I think that'll kind of affect how it goes in the draft this year. Maybe pass rushers will get a little bit of a bump up. Do you see it that way too? Do you think that this is a talented enough class of pass rushers to kind of have them get a bump? And who are some players there that you think might fit with the Seahawks in the first round?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about, kind of where, every year the Super Bowl winning team or the 2 Super Bowl teams kind of set trends moving forward, whether it's the Seattle Seahawks and really their whole secondary build and how they were built, maybe the Broncos mold. And I wonder, and not to get away from pass rushers, but I wonder if teams will start valuing more guys like Malik Jackson, who really set up a lot of those plays in the Broncos run. And value those guys who can get 3 technique, 5 technique, 7 technique, and go there as well. And this class certainly has a ton of defensive line talent and guys that can play versatile as well. But thinking with pass rushers, especially in the mid-rounds, there's a handful of guys that I think could really succeed if you give them some time. And the top guy on my list as far as a pass rusher with loads of upside is Stony Brook's Victor Oshie. I think he did well the shrine game, people I talked to down there, but really on film, he's really only still a bend and edge rush guy and a guy with great speed and great first step, but not a lot of moves to work with. But he's only been playing football for about 5 years, tons of untapped potential, a guy who's a hard worker and developed so much and produced at the FCS level. I think he's got tons of talent to work with. So he's my favorite pick as far as a day 2 or probably a day 3 pass rusher to look out for. But certainly guys like Bronson Kafusi looking for a bigger pass rusher. Ronald Blair maybe play inside, but can do some pass rushing as well. Charles Tapper's guy of Oklahoma, who had a fantastic NFL combine, a guy I wasn't thrilled with on film, had his flashes, but really played out of position, almost like Bruce Irvin at West Virginia, and kind of where he was used unfairly. I think Tapper's a guy that certainly fits that Seahawks mold of probably having a high spark rating, and you guys might know better than I do. But certainly he's a guy that I think piques interest of Seattle Seahawks. But Victor Oshie is the guy I like a lot as far as that edge guy, let him loose, and maybe long-term he can develop into a kind of Bruce Irvin type Leo linebacker player.
Speaking of spark, I just wanted to ask you one more thing about that, because Jonathan Bullard out of Florida was one of the top scorers in that metric this year for the spark rating. What's your kind of breakdown on Bullard's game?
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the Malik Jackson comparison, the guy who's a defensive tackle, defensive end tweener. Where do you fit him? And I think more and more teams are going to grow to not worry about that. If a guy can generate push immediately and kind of eat up a gap and a half, I call it, and really do more than just his responsibility and set up his teammates will go a long way. So it'll be interesting to see where teams feel Bullard can play. I know some teams protect him as a defensive tackle, some as a defensive end, and really everywhere in between. I'm not sure he's necessarily a guy I trust the 5 technique based on his length, but I think he's got all the tools to work with as far as that Malik Jackson type role. So where he'll end up, I think he'll probably go someplace middle of the day 2, maybe late second, early third round. I think he's a plug-and-play rotational guy early on. But again, getting back to that Malik Jackson comparison, we saw a guy like Malik Jackson who didn't have an NFL position. Teams weren't sure exactly what his value was going to be. And he's turned into a dynamic player that really helped the Broncos win the Super Bowl, almost as importantly as Von Miller did, their second overall pick. So I think a team, if they can use Jonathan Bullard well and not rush his development and kind of find a role for him to set up his teammates, that's the role he'll thrive in.
Another defensive player that is of note, I also host a different draft podcast. People can go listen to that, 3009 NFL Mock Draft. And that we talked a lot about, I think at a certain point, we were ready to call Jalen Smith the best player in the draft overall. And obviously he had a devastating injury, and he becomes like the sort of the Marcus Lattimore, I guess, of this draft. Now, sometimes those guys do bounce back. But Jalen Smith, like, where would you expect him to go? And do you think how many teams are just like saying we're just not going to draft this guy?
Yeah, I haven't got a good feeling yet of teams I've spoken with as far as if he's off their board. I don't think any team wants to take him off their board. And the interesting topic I've always kind of brought up, and I got to thank Bleacher Report for this, I guess. I wrote an article for Bleacher Report kind of redoing 2015 draft, which is a bit naive to do a year out. But it was an interesting experience because I realized quickly that there's only about 25, 26, 27 guys in each draft class that are really worth first-round values a couple of years out. And what that kind of told me is that, hey, even if this guy, like Kevin White last year, like Jalen Smith this year, even if he is a redshirt guy, is he still one of the top 32 players you'd want to draft on your team? And that's interesting to look at it. Not necessarily dropping a guy because not playing in 1 year, because that's an obvious statement, but if you really think Jalen Smith, when he's healthy, or even if he's 80% of what he was before, if he's still one of the top 32 players in this draft class after that, then he's worth a first-round pick. But that being said, I doubt he goes in the first round. I think it's more likely than not he goes someplace in the mid-second round, maybe the St. Louis Rams, for example, a team that has 2 second-round picks, or a team that kind of juggles around so they have more than 3 top 100 picks, goes for Jalen Smith. But I'd be surprised if he goes too far past the second round. I do know that based on his insurance policy, the later he falls, he's making a lot of money per draft pick after the first round. So I think financially he'll be okay no matter where he goes. He might even prefer to go 4th round based on what I know about how much money he'll make per pick if he doesn't get picked after the first round. So I think he'll be okay. He'll land the spot. Most likely that's going to be of great value. But we haven't seen a guy like this. And certainly Marcus Lattimore's lack of recovery is going to hurt him. But I've heard mixed things as far as if his development's going to be, he'll be fine eventually. He'll be 80% of what he was. He'll never play again. I've heard kind of all 3 so far. Teams aren't too confident. It's going to come down to which teams trust their team doctors and which team doctors signed off on it. And that could mean maybe 14, 15, 16 teams put him on their board. And when less teams have a guy on the board, the less the guy has value for all the teams across the league. So I think most likely he'll be someplace in the 40 to 65 range and more likely than not in the back end of that.
And he would be probably one of the best players if healthy, right? Like he's a top 5 type pick in your mind if he was healthy?
You know, I've never viewed him as a top 5 pick. I think he doesn't really – I think his instincts as a linebacker were a bit overblown. I think he's more of he's delayed in a lot of his reads in the backfield. He's so explosive and has great range. It kind of makes up for it a lot on film. But there's a handful of times when it's a second-level block that the guard gets his hands on him way too easily. So I think by comparison, Miles Jack is a clear step above Jalen Smith as a prospect. So I think if he was healthy, Jalen Smith, he'd probably be taking Darren Lee's spot of Ohio State and kind of be in that top 12 discussion. I think he'd be a perfect fit for Miami Dolphins to play at 13 or a handful of teams in that range. But I'm not sure he'd be in the elite echelon of Ezekiel Elliott, Joey Bosa, Laramie Tunsil, Jalen Ramsey, and Miles Jack that those guys are. But I think he's still worth a top 15 pick if he's healthy. And without being healthy, I think even 80% of Jalen Smith is better than Reggie Ragland. So put it in that perspective.
Yeah.
If you're okay with sitting him out a year, I think he's that much better than Reggie Ragland. I think if he's not 100%, he's still worth taking over Reggie Ragland on that theory.
You know, Marshawn Lynch obviously retired. Thomas Rawls, who kind of took over for him last year, is still kind of coming off of an injury. So the Seahawks running back position's a little bit up in the air. They haven't done anything in free agency yet there. So I'm guessing the Seahawks will probably pick a running back at some point in the draft. I'm thinking maybe mid-rounds. Are there any sort of, outside of the first round, are there any guys that you really like for the Seahawks or just really like in general Because I don't know if the Seahawks have kind of gone back and forth on their prototypes. I think generally speaking, they like bigger guys, physical guys, but they're also kind of looking at Tyler Ervin the other day. So are there any guys that you really like for the Seahawks?
Yeah, the one guy I like is a mid-round guy, and maybe it doesn't help because he has an injury history that Thomas Rawls and now with Lynch gone, they don't make him deal with. But Jonathan Williams of Arkansas, a guy who's forgotten about it, they missed this whole year, and the foot injury continues to linger, which is really worrisome. It was an issue in season, missed the Senior Bowl, wasn't great at the combine, and those kind of things are going to still bother, I think, teams is those foot injuries that are kind of lingering and bone issues are going to be of concern. But he was really one of the best running backs. I think if he was healthy all year long, there's a chance he might be the third running back behind Alex Henry or Derrick Henry and Ezekiel Elliott. And I think Alex Collins did a great job filling in for him. I think Alex Collins showed why he was one of the top running backs recruits in the country out of high school and why he was so impressive this year. I think he's the third guy in this draft class and a guy I really like at the top of the second round. But Jonathan Williams certainly has pass catching upside. Didn't do a lot of it when he was healthy, but he had a Senior Bowl in certain workouts. He showed a natural fluidity of catching his hands and finishing away from his frame. That's really impressive. He did some pass blocking as well, but an explosive guy who doesn't make mistakes when attacking linebackers, doesn't really allow himself to take big hits, can evade the arm contact and work upfield after first and second contact. So big fan of Jonathan Williams as far as being a third-round pick, but again, the injury is going to be lingering. And certainly Jonathan Howard of Indiana, a guy who could go as high as a second round. I think more likely than not, he's a third or fourth round pick. A guy I'm a big fan of. And you can't dismiss Daniel Lasco. I was told that his combine numbers were shocking to people who worked out with him throughout the whole process, but he certainly tested the roof of the NFL combine. His film has a lot of flashes. I think he's a guy who doesn't really evade contact that well, but when he gets free, he has awesome acceleration to get to the second level and explode upfield. So I think he's a guy you need. If you have great blocking in front of him, he can be a fantastic, change of pace running back. If you don't have great blocking, maybe he'll struggle a little bit more. But I think as a day 3 pick, Daniel Lasco is a guy I'm very curious to see which teams want him.
What do you think about Keith Marshall? I think obviously Marshall blew up the combine, had a 4.3 something 40, kind of came out of nowhere. People were like scrambling to find tape on him. Do you have any thoughts on Keith Marshall?
Yeah, I was surprised, and I talked to some people before the combine that said he could have a strong combine. I wasn't sure how strong it'd be. Obviously, I wasn't expecting that like most people, but I think he's kind of a do-it-all guy and a guy I would love as my change-of-pace guy. But if you're looking for a guy to back up Thomas Rawls long-term and kind of do a little bit of everything, that's a good value. I'm not sure if he's going to be the perfect guy to emerge as a starter if Rawls isn't healthy. I think he's better as a third running back in your rotation, not a second guy. That's why he's more of a day 3 guy for us. But as far as being a reliable guy, I think he makes an NFL roster for sure. I think he does, but he might be a 3 years and out type player despite that workout number. Whereas I think other guys in right situations can have a lot of value long term.
What were your thoughts on Thomas Rawls last year going into the draft?
The character red flags were a big deal, and that's why a lot of teams, it kind of got brushed aside after his great year. But I know, speaking with a handful of people, it was a big deal for teams. Understandably so. It was a very, very unique situation, and I guess not too unique based on the culture now, but certainly one that gave a lot of teams pause. But certainly having the pedigree of transferring from Michigan and being an explosive guy when he's there and producing at a high level too, and certainly testing well at his pro day. I believe it was pro day or his NFL combine. He had the talent there. Now, did anyone see this coming? I certainly didn't see him being this kind of value. And I think before the whole character issue kind of impacted our grade, I think he had a 4th or 5th round grade from us. So we certainly didn't expect him to be rivaling Todd Gurley for the best running back in the NFL this year as far as rookies go. But I think the character stuff certainly was a reason he fell in the draft, and I think it was for good reason. So hopefully these issues are way behind him. There won't be an issue moving forward, and I regret having him as low as we did in our draft grade. But when issues like that arise, it's hard to really kind of put a stamp on a guy as a draft pick. I don't blame teams for kind of passing on a guy like that.
You mentioned Robert Nkemdiche. You said you might even drop him into the second round. He's another guy that, really blew up spark ratings. And last year, the Seahawks took a guy who was very sparky in the second round, and it turned out to be really, kind of controversial, obviously, when they took Frank Clark. Do you see the Seahawks showing interest in Nkemdiche? And I mean, do you think he's kind of a fit in, like you said, that Michael Bennett interior Malik Jackson style role?
First off, I love the term sparky. I think it's a great term for prospects in general, and it makes sense, and also it's pretty catchy. But as far as the DJ, I think the spark rating and athletic testing numbers are one thing, his flashed on film are another. But I've talked to a lot of people on the DJ, and we're going to do a deeper dive on him, but decided against it for our draft guide. But for the most part, I think teams are going to have trouble just trusting him in general. And the character stuff isn't necessarily based entirely on drug use or entirely on the actions he's done in college or his lack of production consistently, whether that's something to do with it. Teams aren't worried about that necessarily. They just don't know what to expect from him. And, he's been the star player on his football team since he was probably 13 or 14 years old. And it's kind of that child-star dynamic of people I've spoken with as far as kind of getting a feel for who he is. And then that lack of trust is going to really worry some teams about, does he love football? Does he want to get better? Will he improve? What about controversy? How's that going to deal with him? So these stuff seem intangible, but taking a guy who hasn't really produced even a full game long in his college career, that's the real concern. So the numbers are there. The athletic scores are there. The flashes are there. I think the question marks, aside from the off-field stuff, are what position is he? Is he a stand-up linebacker? Even I've heard some people talk about, and kind of that Sheldon Richardson type mold for the Jets this year. Is he a 3 technique? Can he play 5 technique? Athletically, I think he can do all these things. But the question mark is going to be, do you trust him to get better? Because right now, based on what he did at Ole Miss, he couldn't start an NFL roster. I think it's a good perspective to have on all these draft picks. None of these guys, at least maybe only a handful, can really start in the NFL right away without any coaching experience and be adequate. Only a handful could. These guys all need development and all need a little bit of patience and time and at least one off season. Will Robert Nietzsche get better in the NFL? That's the question mark teams have to answer. And if they feel he will, then he's worth a first-round pick for sure. You can trust his character and his desire to get better. But I think teams right now aren't sure. So while I said last year, Doyle Green Beckham, no way would go first round. I was shocked he went 33rd overall, so I won't say never say never.
Yeah.
But I think Robert Nietzsche is going to be a guy that I'd be very surprised if teams take in the first round. I think in the second round, maybe a team takes a gamble on him. We've seen teams take gambles in the second round before, and the talent's there to warrant it. But I think it's a huge concern off-field for teams more than on-field for Robert Nietzsche.
You mentioned Doyle Green Beckham, which allows me to transition to receivers real quick. The Seahawks have taken Tyler Lockett and Paul Richardson fairly early in the last couple of drafts. They have Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse signed, though, how long, Doug Baldwin's going into the final year. Paul Richardson's off, always injured. There's still a need for wide receiver, it would seem, for the Seahawks. Now, whether or not that's in the first and second round, it wouldn't be a huge shock, though it would be somewhat surprising. Corey Coleman is a guy that, just ran a very fast 40 at his pro day. I've also seen a lot of good things about Braxton Miller, and it doesn't seem like any one of the wide receivers at the top is really stepping out to be the true number one guy in the top. You've said that the top 5 or 6 are really close, and they could be going on a run in those 20s of the draft. How would you sort of, who is coming out ahead of you in the wide receiver class this year? And is it a position that's got enough depth, or at least like the top so-and-so guys are so close together that waiting for the second round wouldn't necessarily be that bad as opposed to taking one in the first?
Yeah, I think for the most part, even though there's about 35 guys, 40 guys that have grapple grades for us, it's generally a weaker year for receiver this year. And I think that it hurts that there's no guys I would take in the top 10 in this draft class at receiver. None of these guys are really complete players compared to guys that generally go in the top 10 or 15 picks. Laquan Treadwell has his speed question marks and his ability to kind of really separate the NFL level aside from just being a jump ball guy. So he's the top guy for us. I think it's a small notch above the other guys. I'm a big fan of Braxton Miller, not just because of what he's flashed in college or his Senior Bowl performance, because in talking with him and talking to people at Ohio State and kind of learning how quickly he's developed at receiver, I just have confidence he'll get there. He'll be a Randall Cobb type player in the NFL, and that's maybe that's as confident of a pick I can make in a receiver in this class is Braxton Miller doing something as a starter player, which is hard to say for all these guys. All these guys kind of have their awards, whether it's Josh Doxson and is he a good short area receiver? Can he separate with physicality guys in the short area? Corey Coleman, how does he fit outside the Baylor offense and his handed question marks? Michael Thomas, Ohio State, maybe the mental aspect of can he pick up NFL offense? So all these guys kind of have awards, not be first round picks. I think for the Seahawks, looking at that second and third round area, certainly Rashard Higgins of Colorado State is a guy compared in the Bleacher Report article to Tyler Lockett. And I think if they want to go to the same type guys, that's certainly an option they can make. And the big thing about Higgins, which I like so much, is that even in red zone scenarios or one-on-one situations, he hides his hands so well, doesn't reveal himself, and really makes up for being a small receiver by finishing away from his frame, not allowing defensive backs to get comfortable consistently. I think he's a guy that, even though he's smaller, kind of fits that Seahawks, Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett mold of being a solid starter at receiver. Looking for a bigger guy, DeMarcus Robinson of Florida. He's got a lot of talent, but has some baggage as well. Malcolm Mitchell of Georgia is a fantastic athlete, one-time highly prized recruit who finishes so well from his frame. He really impressed me at the Senior Bowl. So I think that the value of receiver really grows in the late third, early fourth round area, just looking for guys that aren't going to fit every offense, but the Seahawks can kind of make work based on the kind of guys they value. So if I was Seattle, I'd probably pass on a first-round receiver unless you really don't feel a 5 technique or a left tackle is there. There's a lot of guys in that third, fourth round area, like Higgins, like Mitchell, like DeMarcus Robinson, that all can kind of plug and play right away. And the Seahawks done a great job in finding receiver value in the past. I don't think they should rush it now because they want one more guy to replace Paul Richardson moving forward.
I wanted to get your take on a couple different guys just to add on to that. What do you think of Kieras Garrett and Tyrone Peak? And sorry if I mispronounced those names, but those are 2 guys kind of getting some buzz lately around here.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Peak. I don't think he's the guy I trust to separate as well at the NFL level, but I think he's a late round guy. But Garrett's much more intriguing to me because I'm not sure what Garrett is yet. And he's a tall, lean, vertically stretching receiver, but doesn't really do a whole lot off that route tree. And that's the question mark I have. Is it an offense? Is it a Tulsa offense that kind of inhibited him to do those kind of things? Is it a stiffness question mark? I really don't know yet. And if he ends up being one of the top 4 or 5 receivers in this draft class, I won't be shocked because athletically, high point ability, and vertically stretching wise, he's thoroughly impressive. But the question mark for him is that is he going to be able to adjust to the NFL game, get separation, run more decisive routes, really sink in his knees and hips, and explode on those post, in, out, comeback routes we haven't seen at the college level. So I think the stiffness question mark is whether he hasn't done it at the college level or whether he can do it in the NFL. And those guys are always intriguing to me. The guys that haven't been able to show what all their athleticism can do at the college level, how those guys react in the NFL. And Jermaine Kearse is a guy like that too, out of college, that kind of fit what the Seahawks did in being a lean-built, physical, tall receiver who didn't really get the chance to show too much versatility at the college level. Maybe Kieras Garrett can be that as well. So I'm not a huge fan of Peak as far as a day 3 guy, but I think Garrett's a guy in the third, fourth round area, kind of that fringe day 2, day 3, that could really emerge as one of the best receivers in this draft class.
I guess my last real question for me would be, we talked about the offensive tackles for a brief moment, and we talked about value and everything like that. But in that second wave of tackles, because it definitely seems, I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Seahawks are not going to, be drafting Ronnie Stanley or Jack Conklin. It seems like, there's the 3 guys that have really taken the top spots. Maybe there's something going on, perhaps, though, with Taylor Decker, Jason Spriggs, Fady. And another guy that we've talked a lot about on 3000 NFL Mock Draft is Sean Coleman, who's a little bit older, overcame, a battle with cancer. But, my colleague Rob Staten, in many ways, thinks that Sean Coleman could be the best tackle in this draft overall if everything were equal. How would you rank those second group of tackles? Which one do you think has the most potential to break out long term?
Yeah, I think at the top, there's really 5, maybe 6 tackles. Tunsil, who's going to go on the top, arguably probably the top 2 or 3 picks. I think Spriggs, Decker are really the next tier of guys. Ronnie Stanley's a guy I still expect to go someplace in the top 16 pick, but there's real concern about his passion for football and his willingness to get better. Talent-wise, he's certainly been one of the most impressive left tackles in the last 2 years at the college level, but don't be shocked if he ends up going in the late teens, maybe even the early 20s. I think the Seahawks can move up a little bit to get him. It's wild because if there's any coach I trust to get the most out of it off of the tackle, passion-wise, definitely Tom Cable. So I think Ronnie Stanley is maybe a little bit in play for the Seahawks, but you mentioned Decker. Decker might be there, but most likely it goes a little bit before them. Conklin, I've been told, is kind of a favorite of teams in the team, especially in that Bulls Colts. You mentioned Fetty, but I think LaRaven Clark as a second-round option. We talked about him earlier. Sean Coleman is a guy I'm not a huge fan of, and the main reason is that his footwork, his upper half and lower half being in sync is not there. That's the biggest red flag I have with a lot of left tackle prospects, is offensive tackle prospects in general, is can you do the upper half and lower half movement at the same time? And watching Sean Coleman actually just last week, his base gets too wide. When he sets his base strong, his hand placement's way off. When he engages well with his hands, his off balance on his lower half. So I think he still needs a lot of development, and I think he's a 25-year-old rookie, at least he will be coming this year. I got to still need some development as left tackle prospect is going to worry me a little bit. So I'm not sure he's worth considering as a long-term left tackle option, and he's not ready to go immediately to be a guy you want to trust at the left tackle spot in an offense that hopes to be back in the Super Bowl next year. So I'm not sure he's the guy to look out for. I mentioned LaRaven Clark, and I want to go back to him because, like I said, I've been told Clark's going to go someplace in the top 40 picks. The Seahawks make the most sense. I think I mentioned after the top 6 or 7 offensive tackles, there's not a guy I trust him in the left tackle spot, maybe not even the right tackle spot for the first couple of years in the NFL. So I think if Seattle wants to address their needs adequately in this draft class, they really need to target off the tackle in the first round, get their 5 technique, 3 technique, get their running backs, receivers later on the process, but really get one of these top 5 or 6 offensive tackles. It's a very strong year for left tackle prospects. We generally don't see as many as 6 guys who are capable to play left tackle early on in the NFL come in the draft in a certain year. I think this year has it. The Seahawks are smart, which I think they are as a front office. I think looking at left tackle, if possible, is the best route for them to go. We're kind of addressing their needs in this draft.
Erik, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is so you can tell our listeners and our readers a little bit about your draft guide. Just kind of tell everyone what to expect from your draft guide. We'll include a link in the post and everything, but what's the skinny on that?
Well, awesome. I appreciate you guys having me on and talk a little about the draft and as well as give a little draft guide plug. But we're really excited about the draft guide turnout this year. It's our 5th year doing draft guide, which I think is one of the longer ones you'll find on the internet. And it's a PDF file, so it's easy to download, easy to access on mobile. But I'm really excited about the different things we've added this year. So we have over 250 scouting reports in there, and these reports are more than just you'll find on most websites. They're really thorough. They're designed based off of the NFL scouting reports we've used in the past from teams to kind of address these guys. So they're really NFL report focused and maybe over in depth for the casual fan, but hopefully that's a good thing. So we have those reports and more coming in supplement. We have 4 analytic studies by Charles McDonald, Anthony Chiato, Derek Klassen, and Arif Hassan, all super unique ones on quarterback. And looking at the top, I believe it's the top 8 or 10 quarterbacks in this draft class, and looking at their throws, but much more thoroughly broken down. Run blocking and pass blocking analytics by Charles McDonald, pass rusher production on all type of pass rush moves by Anthony Chiato, and combat analytics by Arif. So those analytics have gotten great reviews from people in the league as well as people in the media, kind of getting a feel for them. So we're really excited how those turned out. We get the big board, top 300 players in the draft class, top 50 small school players. Small school is a big thing we do.
Nice.
On and off the event. We have that kind of in there as well. So a lot of cool stuff. I'm really excited about how it turned out. We have a great staff this year. 9 guys total who are all in the draft guide and get their credit. And I think they've done a fantastic job putting together a great product this year. So we're really excited about the draft guide this year, not just because we want to sell, but because it came together well. People in the league have responded well to it. And then hopefully fans, and so far people who have purchased it have too.
Really awesome. So yeah, obviously I would definitely recommend it. I've gotten the chance to take a look at it, and it's great. It's really, really good. I can't wait to read the whole thing, honestly, just as we prep for the draft. Erik, we really want to thank you for coming on. Clearly know your stuff, so it's great to talk to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. So yeah, that was Erik. Obviously, you might have missed that, but Arif is also another guy who works on this draft guide. People at Field Goals will know Arif from his multiple appearances at the site when the Seahawks sign former Viking players. But I like talking to Erik a lot. He's the guy that's in the past kind of talked to me on the side about different things that he's hearing at the from teams and things like that. So he's really plugged in. I definitely would recommend his draft guide. So that was a good little 30 minutes.
Yeah, that was nice analysis, and I think that it's interesting because I think, as you could tell several times, there's definitely a gap, I think, between some of the stuff, some of the ideologies or opinions we have on certain prospects over a 3,000 NFL mock draft, and some of the opinions that Erik has. And I think that gap, that's all part of the process. People have different opinions, and there isn't at this point in the process, there isn't a right and wrong. So it's like we're just trying to. Everybody has their opinions on what they value in a prospect, and you have to sort of weigh that one way or another, and everybody eventually will, if you do, people that spend a lot of time with it, everybody will have the guys that they're right about, and have a few that that they just missed or whatever. Just like everybody missed on Thomas Rawls last year, as we said. Though when it's character flags and if there's something like that, it could always rear its ugly head once again. So
look at Martavis Bryant, kind of
right.
He really hits that point home. I think. As you were saying, he to me, he looked like, God, why the hell did people pass him up so much? The red flags thing really didn't show up. But then now, you kind of realize, I think he must have failed 3 or 4 or 5 tests to get to this point where you're banned for a year. I don't think it's not like he failed one test. He's been failing tests for a while now.
Yeah.
So I mean, you have to take those red flags into account. I think that it's like kind of like it's going to be hitting close to home, I think, for some teams going to the draft this year, because, you know, you don't want to have a guy that, you know, really, really talented guy like Bryant who just can't play because, you know, he's not able to stay out of trouble off the field.
You know, you've had some, you know, you came on our podcast, the 3000 podcast, and as we get into the March and as we approach April, you have more of an opportunity now to watch these guys and talk about them and look at them. And I even, you know, I can hear, you know, the acknowledgement in your throat when Erik mentions a certain prospect and you go, yeah.
Yeah.
Now you've had a chance maybe to look at over some of these guys. Now that you've had more of a chance to do that, is there anybody that really piques your interest at 26 or even in the middle rounds?
Well, I mean, at 26, I think, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Russell Okung, because that will kind of shape my feeling on like what they need to do. If they don't get Okung, I think you have to take an offensive lineman. Even if he's not going to play immediately, you just have to start figuring out something for that position. I don't know if they see Jamarcus Webb as like the answer there, but yeah, I mean, I think you know, talking about the offensive tackles, I think those guys are definitely interesting. If you get a guy like Taylor, the guy from Ohio State who's named Taylor Decker, if he falls there, you got to kind of, I think you have to consider that. You know, a lot of people think Spriggs is the kind of guy that the Seahawks would like. He obviously tested really well. But then there's questions about his functional strength and things like that. So
it's still like if the position is so important, you really have to, even if they re-sign Russell Okung, how many starts do you expect to get out of him next year or
right.
the year after that? There is so many concerns about this guy's health. I mean, should we just move on? You know, I think the Seahawks have. I think that the Seahawks have moved on, and I think they would still bring him back if he took like $5 or $6 million. But it's not something where I think that they necessarily at this point are just, what are you supposed to do? How can you go into a season every year kind of expecting your starting left tackle to just miss 2 or 3 or 4 starts? I mean, if they can have this opportunity now, I think, to get a guy that's young, even if they re-signed Russell Okung, I think that, you know, part of it is they want to probably sign him to a deal that doesn't hold them to him for longer than a couple years, or is backloaded, and he wants a deal that is front-loaded like the Raiders are giving to everybody. And it's like there's got to be something there for the Seahawks to maybe just move on and try and find a guy that is just a little bit more reliable. Is that a pretty big concern for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's funny because we've talked about offensive line, it seems like, for the last couple of years, and you know, the Seahawks still kind of have a lot of questions there, and they probably will end up not taking a tackle with their first pick, you know, just kind of based on their history. But I think it's something they need to address, whether it's through free agency or the draft. And I think a couple of those guys are obviously interesting. You know, I think they've been connected to Jermaine Ifedi. But you know, when you mentioned how I was kind of acknowledging, I really like Jonathan Williams, running back. And when he mentioned him, I was kind of excited about that, because I actually, when I was watching tape, I liked him more than I liked Alex Collins. I think Alex Collins has gotten a lot of hype, and I think, you know, he's got some good tape for sure, and I liked what he did on tape. But I think Jonathan Williams kind of fits the Seahawks a little bit more. I think he's got a nice explosiveness for his size. You know, he's 5'11", 220, but he's got some juice. You know, he just looks to me more like a Seahawks type running back. So he's a guy that I'm pretty high on. And I actually, you know, he mentioned Daniel Lasco too. I actually, you know, he's a kind of a one-year wonder, but when I was watching him, I actually was really impressed. So it wouldn't surprise me greatly if they kind of looked at Lasco, even though he's maybe a little bit out of their size range, what they've typically done in the past. And I think CJ Procise is another interesting guy. So those mid-round running backs, I think, not mid-round, but like early mid-rounds, those interest me a lot. You know, I still haven't gotten into a lot of the positions. I have a lot of work left to do, but those guys kind of intrigue me for sure. And then I think they'll still probably go with some cornerback, in the mid rounds, kind of like they've done over the years. And I don't know that those guys quite well enough at this point, but I know that, there's some size things that they definitely kind of look at. So he actually mentioned a receiver out of Georgia, and I'm of course blanking on the name because I screw up the names every single time, but the Seahawks actually it sounds like the Seahawks worked him out as a cornerback, Malcolm Mitchell out of Georgia. And he's kind of a guy that they might try switch over to the defensive side of the ball. He's 6 foot, 198, super fast kind of guy. And he is interesting. So those are some guys that kind of piqued my interest when he was talking. But I still have a lot of work to do in terms of, figuring out my rankings.
Yeah, you have a lot more work to do. I think everybody that's been reading the site, they've been quietly coming up to me and be like, Danny has to do more work. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but he's lazy. So
it's that time of year where you just, don't want to wake up.
Yeah, it's interesting in with the free agency moving all along and everything. And I mean, what are your thoughts? We can move into current Seahawks rather than potential Seahawks. What were your thoughts on Jamarcus Webb? Because the Seahawks signed him and he wasn't highly thought of, but they gave him enough money to be like, yeah, this is a guy that we're going to actually play.
Yeah. So I think it's part of it is kind of like, it's all relative because the Seahawks are not paying anybody on their offensive line right now. So like he immediately became the highest paid guy. I don't think necessarily that his salary is like wild, in terms of like interior offensive lineman, his deal isn't even that high. But if he's actually a tackle, then his deal is definitely not on the high end. I think he's making like, I forget off the top of my head, $3.5-4 million or something like that. I mean, if you look at it like, I think Evan Mathis just signed for, I think, $6 million or something like that. And he's like, 34 or whatever. And I don't know exactly how strong he was last year, but he's obviously up there in age and he's an interior guy. So that kind of gives you an idea. And like, obviously J.R. Sweezy was like $7 million. So, look at Webb and you're like, okay, well, I think they just signed him. They like him as a, potential swing tackle, potential guy who they could throw in at tackle and he would be okay. I think they like that he can play inside and outside. He's kind of the guy that can play he can play 4 positions for them, and that's valuable. They see that as valuable. So I think that's kind of how they see him. I think he's kind of an insurance policy in case they don't get Okung back. Obviously, they don't get Penn because he signed with the Raiders. But, I think from everything you've heard about Webb, it's pretty underwhelming. I guess he was like the worst graded guard last year or whatever. But, I don't know if that means anything for what they're doing with the Seahawks, like potentially, different style, different scheme with the Seahawks. So maybe that's a little bit different.
Yeah. I think it's another thing to talk about. We're just like, with the right coaching, certain guys may have more potential to be better. But, he was with the Raiders. The Raiders had a really good season out of Donald Penn. They have, now they've supposedly got like the best offensive line in football. So it's not like they had bad players. You wouldn't expect that the Raiders had bad coaching. So as far as whether or not like he's going from a bad situation to a better one, it's sort of, I think it really is just the versatility where it's like he can play. They probably feel he can play 4 spots on the offensive line, and if something goes down, that in a pinch, really, every single offensive lineman they have is a guy that you could use in a pinch. It's just that they're starting, and that's sort of the pinch. But do you expect Sowell to make it to the final 53?
Who? Oh, Sowell.
Yeah.
Who? Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think, his deal would indicate they see him as a competition guy. I think he has $200,000 guaranteed, which is not very much in terms of NFL money. So
right. I'll take $200,000 for nothing.
I know, right? I'd take $200,000 to like work. I think they see him as another swing tackle kind of guy. He can long snap too, which is kind of another an interesting part of this because they released Clinton Gresham yesterday. So maybe they see him as a guy. I don't know. Like, I'm always a little leery about making this prediction because they haven't really done it in the past ever, and teams rarely do this. But like, he has the potential to be both a backup offensive lineman and the long snapper, which is valuable. So if they see him as a starting long snapper plus a guy who can, be active on game days as a backup lineman if necessary, I think that, that's valuable. And maybe that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to save a roster spot, save a game day active spot for that position. And that would be kind of a cool way to go about it. So maybe that's what they're doing. I think it's probably more likely they just see him as a tackle that can also long snap if they need him. But that's kind of the thing to watch with him. I think, is he going to be the long snapper? Because I guess this Andrew Nelson or what's his name? Andrew East, this long snapper is apparently kind of exciting, super athletic guy. He ran like a 4.6 or something like that. And he has
that matters.
Well, I mean, it does kind of in terms of special teams when you're doing coverage and things like that, like getting down the field. Maybe they see that guy as kind of like the future there, but and maybe you use them for trick plays because they always love doing that shit. But I don't know. I think Soul is kind of like a fringe roster guy. I think Webb is a clear roster player. It's unclear if they see him as a starter or not, but I think he has the potential to be one of their starters, which is pretty crazy. Maybe they see him as a left guard. Maybe they're just really not happy with Justin Britt, which wouldn't surprise me. He's
it's interesting. I don't know what the numbers are yet, but it seems within the last hour, Andre Smith has signed a 1-year deal with the Vikings. Yeah. Andre Smith was
very much. That means he didn't get very much.
Right.
1-year deal at $4.5 million.
That's another tackle, a guy that was considered to be a pretty decent right tackle, I think. And
I think that he kind of was, but I think that people worry about his weight and things like that. Like, I don't know. I think he's a fringe good. Like, I wouldn't say he's like a solid, real good tackle. I think people have questions about him. I think the market dictated that too.
Yeah, I mean, just all these tackles falling down and nothing so far for Okung. And what's going to happen? He's got all these visits, but not a lot of. He's got 0 deals, a lot of visits, and it seems like he just leaves the city, and it's like, okay, now he's going to Boston, and now he's going to Phoenix or whatever. And it's just he just goes to another team, and it doesn't seem to be working out. The reports are that he could be asking for 13, and others saying that he shouldn't get more than 8. I mean, is there, as far as what you've like sort of gathered from various intel sources or just the newswire, what do you think is the disconnect? How far away apart do you think Russell is from the reality of the situation?
Yeah, it's I don't have any intel in terms of what he's going to get. I did also hear the whole 13-14 million thing before it was on Twitter. So I think that is a legit thing. I think someone saying, he's asking for a lot, and you have to ask for a lot. Like, that's how free agency works. If you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. Obviously, right. I don't think he's going to get that at this point. I think he would have gotten, I think he's probably nowhere near what he wants yet, or else he would have taken the deal. But he's probably the top offensive free agent out there right now still. I think he's got a couple offers from different clubs. And it was interesting because I think John Clayton said the other day that he got a 4-year deal or a 3-year deal offered from the Steelers, but they wouldn't give him any guaranteed money, which means I think that kind of shows you teams view him, like you were alluding to, teams view him as a real risk because of the injury history, Can you just rely on this guy? Like, is he actually going to, be there to play for you when you're paying him all this money? So that's kind of the big thing. I think it's interesting because, former agent Joel Corey, CBS writer, he said this several times now that he thinks Okung is going to end up taking like a 1-year, $5 million deal to try and reset his market, prove that he can play healthy, and see how that goes. So I wonder if that's like just his hunch, or if maybe there's a little bit of, intel there. I think that I'm just talking to Davis about it. He's under the impression he thinks the Seahawks can match pretty much anything that Okung gets offered at this point. He thinks that the
Right.
Seahawks will be able to match it. So I wouldn't count the Seahawks out quite yet.
It's like, it's funny because it's like, oh, maybe Russell wants to take a smaller 1-year deal to prove it. And it's like, maybe he doesn't want to take a smaller 1-year deal because he knows he can't. Because he's like,
Right.
I mean, wait, why would he think like, I'm going to take a 1-year deal to prove I can do something that I've never done before?
Right, exactly. So,
if someone comes out and says, yeah, I mean, maybe it is at the point, but contracts are so funny because it's like, typically you either sign like, if you're, unless there just aren't that many 2 or 3 year deals. You have to be like in that position of being like 35 years old or something like that to really get a 2 or 3 year deal, because now you're like, well, I don't really expect to play that much longer. But if you're a player of Okung's age and of his position, I think you're either going to get like a 1-year deal or a 4 or 5 year deal that's sort of fake at the last couple years.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it seems like a team could, and, APY really is a difficult way to evaluate a contract because of the fact that they are so ballooned usually in certain spots that don't make a lot of sense. And really it's like, okay, so if let's say Okung does get a 4-year, $48 million deal with the Detroit Lions, and can the Seahawks match a $12 million APY? Well, they can if the 4-year deal, only has $10 million fully guaranteed, and it's like he really only is beholden to them in the first couple years, where it's like it's really a 2-year, $19 million deal with 2 years that are just not guaranteed whatsoever. So it's like, yeah, I think that he probably is at the point now where if he hasn't signed a deal already, he's probably not going to sign one that's too prohibitive. And the market, with everybody sort of signing the other second wave of tackles, with all those guys getting signed, the Ryan Harrises and the Andre Smiths or whatever, even though he's not really doing much as far as the left tackle market goes. But how many teams, at this, I mean, there are a lot of teams that still kind of need a left tackle because there's left tackle like quarterback. There's just not enough, and there's not enough to go around for starting every team. But enough teams are probably in the position where like, we're as fine with this guy that we have right now to not really like pay you what you're asking for. So what is his market now? It's really the Seahawks and maybe a couple other teams, because then even then it's like, well, what's his market? The Detroit Lions. I mean, Riley Reiff might not be a great left tackle, but he is playing it, and they do have to pay him $8 million next year, no matter what. So that they're just not in a rush. I mean, the only team that I can really think of that literally, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the Giants situation is, because I know he went there and I know they lost Beatty. But the Broncos could say, maybe we think Ryan Clady's going to come back next year. His market isn't very good, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think I think it's kind of just a bad market right now for the tackles. And I think, he's only got a few suitors left at this point, and I don't think anyone's like really bidding it up that much. I think he's trying to drum up, some competition for him and get the price tag going up, but it just doesn't seem like that's happening at this point. So I would say that, but yeah, his market's probably not what he's expecting, and he may end up just, either not getting as big of a deal as he was hoping, or like Joel Corey is saying, maybe just take a 1-year deal to, I guess, bet on himself. But again, it's kind of funny. Like he maybe just doesn't want to do that because, like you said, he hasn't been able to do it at all. So it might just not help him at all. So I don't know. It's interesting. I still think the Seahawks are in it. I wouldn't count them out at this point. And I think it'll probably happen soonish. So it's something to watch. Hopefully, we'll kind of know what's going on with that soon. And, he might get, like you said, you might get a deal that's pretty big looking. And I think that's important to him. But at the end of the day, it's not like that crazy of a deal because of guaranteed money and ability to get out and things like that. I think he really could end up getting a deal like that.
I'm seeing this just this article now, and it's kind of I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but it says Bruce Irvin says I couldn't reach my potential in Seattle. Have you had a chance to look that over?
Yeah, I saw that. And I
What do
think
you make of it? What was he saying? What do you make of it?
I think he's right. First of all, he's playing Sam linebacker on usually 2 downs, and then he rushes on the 3rd down. And so if he sees himself as like a pure pass rusher, then yeah, I mean, I think, if you're telling a guy to like, set the edge and drop back into pass coverage on the first 2 downs, that is kind of hurting your potential. And that's just like from a pure pass rushing point of view. And that's what he was I think that's what he was saying. Like he wants to be a pass rusher. And the Seahawks didn't really make him a pure pass rusher. But the question is, were the Seahawks really holding him back, or was he just not good enough to be an every down pass rusher? I think that's the question. And I think that obviously the Raiders saw him as a guy who could be an every down pass rusher, and they're betting on him being able to do that. So I think he definitely has a point. I think he's right. Like if he wants to be a pure pass rusher, get 10 plus sacks a game or to 10 plus sacks a year, then the way the Seahawks were using him was limiting him in that sense. But the question is, were the Seahawks limiting him, or were they just playing him where he needed to play because he's not good enough to be an every down pass rusher? I think that's kind of, the distinction that you have to make there.
I guess one more thing to talk about, one more, sort of overlying, I guess, discussion with free agency and with trades. Chandler Jones was traded, Martellus Bennett was traded. There are deals happening. The Seahawks, whether or not they're on the phones, I would say they're probably out there trying to make a trade. That they've got things that they're working on, and not afraid to use the first round pick, not afraid to tinker with things. I know there's been a lot of talk this week about Cam Chancellor being happy where he is, and them being happy with Cam Chancellor, and that there's not going to happen anything with Cam Chancellor being traded away. But there's definitely moves that could be made. And as far as all the free agent signings or the trades going down, was there any one player that switched that you said, I wish that the Seahawks would have matched that contract? I wish they would have been the ones to give that guy that deal, because if he's going to sign for that, I wish that they would have been the one. Why didn't they go in there and step up and maybe offer him a little bit more and see what he would have said? Right. Or with any of the trades, were you thinking, I wish that they would have been able to, move their first round pick or move like a good something for Chandler Jones?
Yeah.
I think that, Martellus Bennett probably doesn't fit here with, I mean, at the right price, maybe Bennett does fit and come play with his brother. But any players that you wish the Seahawks, once you saw what their cost was, you wish the Seahawks would have made that move?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like the Bennett thing is interesting, and I would have loved to have him on the Seahawks just because it would be entertaining. But I think, to me, the one move that was like kind of mystifying that the Seahawks didn't get in on it was the 1 year, $2 million deal that Chris Long signed with the Patriots. And I don't know if Chris Long has anything left in the tank. He's been injured pretty much the last couple of years, and so you haven't seen him do what he normally does. And he was like a 10-plus sack guy for years, but he's getting older, and the last 2 years have been not good. So I can kind of see why he only got $2 million, but it seems like, man, like they gave fucking Jamarcus Webb $3.5 million. Like, pass rush is so important, and they're not exactly deep. To me, they're not very deep at outside pass rusher right now. I think I don't have a lot of trust in Cassius Marsh at this point, and I still don't have a lot of trust in Frank Clark yet. I mean, I think Frank Clark's gonna be really good, but are you relying on him as like a strong like pass rusher? Like, I still want them to add more pass rush teeth to their defense. I think having more depth there is important. And so like I was kind of bummed out to see Chris Long go. Not that I necessarily think Chris Long was going to be like the guy that puts him over the top, but I just think he'd be a kind of rotational guy that, really solid, good, former like, second overall pick, like super talented guy that you come in certain situations and give them a boost as a pass rusher. But watch him, go and play for the Patriots and probably get like 6 or 7 sacks or 8 sacks this year. And I'm kind of that was kind of a bummer. I think I like what the Patriots have done. I'm glad that the Seahawks didn't give up a big, like, kind of like what the Cardinals did. I'm glad they didn't do a huge deal to get Chandler Jones. because I heard that they were in on that too, you know. But I think, like we've talked about, they're in on pretty much everything. You know, they just kind of they stick their nose in everything, is the impression I get, and see what's going on, you know.
Right.
Kind of like get into every conversation. Hey, what are you guys talking about? You know.
Yeah.
So
it's like, you know, but it is interesting because it's like, I mean, yeah, it's wild, right? Because I mean, the Cardinals and Patriots make this trade, and then they each refill the hole with a guy that's pretty well known, Evan Mathis and Chris Long. So they each come out with like basically, you know, not getting very much worse at a certain position, you know, keeping, you know, they trade away a pass rusher. They sign a guy that used to be really good and might be decent now. You know, the team trades away a guard that was decent, and they trade one that's been a lot better, but is, you know, older now. And so like they sort of get what they want. You know, the Patriots get the second rounder. You know, what if a team had just come along and just spent $8 million to sign Evan Mathis and Chris Long? You know, and it's funny because it's like you get the $8 million. Maybe they're not a long-term solution, but if you're going for a Super Bowl this year, would you rather commit $8 million to them or $17 million to Malik Jackson or Olivier Vernon? You know, that the cost is so much more for that one guy than maybe those couple of guys. And free agency has definitely been interesting this year because of how much money has been spent.
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot. I mean, there's still a good amount of guys out there still, so it's still a pretty interesting group, and defensively especially. Offensively, it's kind of been picked over, but there's still some interesting guys on defense.
Yeah. Not as much money spent by the Seahawks, but in total free agency, but they did retain a couple of guys that they really wanted, and you know it's not over yet. They've still got, you know, after they release Marshawn Lynch or retires or whatever, they've still got a good 17, 18 million in cap room with which to work. Some of that going to rookies, but that's why they're definitely not out of Russell Kung's market and whatever else is out there. So, and there will be more big names that will get released or will get traded between now and the season. So that wraps it up for this week's Reel in the Field Goals. You can follow on Twitter at Field Goals, follow on Twitter at Kenneth Arthur S. And yeah, that's go to fieldgoals.com. Come back every Thursday. Subscribe on iTunes. We've still got a Patreon account going that's helped us upgrade the show this year. And that's it. Danny, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just thanks to Erik Galko for coming on the show and talking draft, and check out his draft guide. Obviously, we'll have a link to it up at the site. And yeah, thanks again to the Patreon, you know, donators, I would say sponsors, because that's definitely going to help us move forward. You know, we still have a lot of things in plan that we just haven't gotten around to like putting into action yet, but there's still a lot of stuff on the radar. So thanks again for that.
Yeah, and if you want to sponsor us officially with your business, definitely hit us up. We're open open to that as well. Until next week, though, just keep it real in the field. Goals.